So, hello everybody. My name is Crystal Williams. I am a sports editor for my college, the MATC Times, as well as a sports content creator, which to where I love to educate people about sports, about the ins and outs of it. And today I am here with former NFL player and author of this book, Not for Long, the life and career of an NFL player. Mr. Robert W. Turner. So thank you for giving me the privilege to interview you today. So how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the lovely introduction.
You said that you used to play for the NFL. It wasn't that long. How long did you play for the NFL and what team did you play for?
So my whole career, I went to James Madison University on a scholarship in Virginia. And then after I finished there, I was drafted by the Memphis Showboats in the old USFL back in the 80s. And then, and some of your fans, some of the people who listen to this might remember, I was drafted in the same draft class on the same team with Reggie White, who went on to be a Green Bay Packer Hall of Famer. So I was very happy about that. But my rights were traded to the New Jersey Generals, and I played a full season there, and then I played two full seasons up in Canada, and then after that, I went to the San Francisco 49ers, and I made it all the way through camp, and then I made it out of camp in the first couple of games, and then I got released. So I've played 4 full years of football, but through three different leagues.
Throughout those 4 years, did you ever win a Super Bowl or was you ever inducted into the Hall of Fame by any chance?
No, 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 no. I was a good, if you read my book, you'll see, from in high school, I was a star player, right? Then in college, I was definitely an above average player, really solid, strong. On our team, we had 7 guys wind up going to play in professional football from the class that I came in at James Madison. And then that's what we talk about in the book, right? You go like you're basically a fan, then I go star, and then you become some people remain stars, some people are a journeyman, and I was definitely a journeyman all the way through my career. That I tell people that 49ers won a Super Bowl the year before I got there, and then one of their key players got hurt, and I came in and took his position until he was healthy again, and then they released me after that. And so they didn't win the Super Bowl the year that I was there, but they won it the year before I was there and the year after I was there. So that was why they probably got rid of me because they didn't win the Super Bowl.
In your book on page 2, you discuss how 78% of NFL athletes go bankrupt from the year 1996 to 2003. Retired players file for bankruptcy within 2 years of retirement. So my question to you is so when it comes to benefits like a 401k or a retirement plan, does the NFL not have that?
No, they do. And the thing that's really important to remember is what really dictates player salaries, and they've escalated considerably over the years. In the book, I talk about really free agency didn't happen for the NFL until 1992. That was the first collective bargaining agreement that really started to making the salaries increase significantly. So prior to that, if you look way back into the 60s, most guys who were playing back at those days, particularly the very famous Green Bay Packers, many of those guys actually professional football at one point was kind of like a side gig. It was a part-time job, and they had another full-time job. Some of these guys worked for, breweries, distilleries, or like distributors and those kinds of things. And then things, really was lots of exploitation, very low salaries. And then finally, they gained a form of free agency in the collective bargaining in 1992, which they had to plan. They had one free agent, and then they had Plan B free agents, and then so money started to get much better. And really, still in the rule today, there's no guaranteed contracts, although players are getting money up front, signing bonuses guaranteed through. So the money is much more lucrative now. Those stats that you're reading from are really from guys who were like post this last, I mean, they were prior to this last collective bargaining agreement. No doubt there are still people who find themselves in very much financial hardship. I'd love to know what those statistics are now compared to what they were at that time. Guys are making a lot more money, but if they don't have that financial literacy and aren't smart going in, it's just as much money going out as coming in. So, your question is well positioned, but the NFL does offer really strong benefits, and they do rookie symposiums and other things to help educate people. But as you well know, the more money you have, the more that people are committed to targeting you to get that money out of your pocket.
Okay. Page three, in addition to financial difficulties, NFL Players Association reports that 65% of 870 former NFL athletes reported having experienced a major on the field injury that requires surgery or forced them to miss 8 games. So, with that being said, is when it comes to those injuries, especially after retirement, I know in the book you mentioned how there were some young guys that needed like hip replacements and things like that, but they were, probably denied because they were too young. So, when things like that happen and they file a lawsuit with the NFL, I guess what is your take on that overall?
Well, one thing is for sure about, we talked about the difference in how salaries are starting to escalate today compared to before. The one thing that hasn't changed, and in some respects, we're actually trying to do some work on this, that I think, there's some anecdotal evidence that the game is even more violent in a way than it was today. Although the 80s, everyone knows the 80s were, they'd rip your head off just as much as anything else. That was my era for sure. But, DeMaurice Smith, who was the former, head of the NFL Players Association, he said that one thing is for certain with the NFL is that you have 100% chance that you're going to be injured during your career. There's no question about that. It is not a contact sport; it is a collision sport. And we've done some other research that shows, depending on the injuries that you sustain when you're playing and how that impacts your retirement, is going to impact your overall health outcome after you play, right? So a lot of the research that I'm doing is trying to understand what are the, kind of the risk behaviors, the risk and protective behaviors when guys are both in the league, in a way in the league, you're trying to do everything you can health wise is to remain in the league. And that may be do you really, really well in order to be a professional on the field, right? But once you get older, it's going to take a different level of kind of approach to your health and a different level of health management afterwards. And so that's one of the major contentions that the NFL has with the players union is lifetime health benefits, which most of the time you figure if the career in the NFL is 3.3 seasons, 4 seasons, something like that, you start at 22, by 26, 27, for sure by 30, your career is done unless you're Tom Brady, right? But most of those aches and pains, and then you have like 6 years of health benefits or something like that afterwards. But most of those aches and pains don't start coming until you're, in some respects, I didn't start to feel mine until I was about 35. And it was really, psychologically, it was devastating because I started to have pain in my knees. I never had a knee operation in my career. And then I went to the doctor and I tried to find out what was the problem with them. And the doctor said at 35, 36 years old, I had arthritis in my knees. And that was mind blowing because in my mind, you don't get arthritis until you're 65, 70 years old. And here, that's a full life ahead of me. How, like, that was devastating, right? But that also meant the doctor told me, okay, you need to have a plan, a health plan of how you're going to action plan to make sure that you don't need to get your knees replaced at 40 or 45. You want to make these knees as last as long as you can. So it really takes a whole different shift in mindset once a player is a former player compared to what they are. And I would say in football, that's even more challenging because we're talking about people when they go to the NFL or they go to the pros or they play at the University of Wisconsin at these major universities, they, just like young guys see themselves as Superman. They've defied and beat all the odds, and their bodies treat them like they're superhuman. But at some time, all of those extra hits, those violent collisions are going to catch up with you. And so you really need to learn how to work with healthcare professionals and manage your body and really treat your body in a certain way as you get older.
Yeah, it's very interesting you said that because I have a cousin that played college football. And I know, there was talks in our family about him possibly going into the NFL. And I know that like now he is dealing with pretty much a lifelong injury. I think he tore his ACL and now, he says, now that affects him long term because, now he has a kid and, he wants to run and play, with their kid. And now it's like, he can't really do it because, of what, his body went through while playing college football.
So there's the physiological effects of it and how your body heals and responds to these injuries, right, and pain. But then there's also the psychological, so what we call psychosocial impacts of it. Like psychologically, what does that mean that I can't play with my child? And then what does that? How does your child respond to that, right? And then how does, in the broader context of all the people in your social circle, what does that mean when everybody else is out there playing basketball with their kid and you need to sit on the sidelines, right? So how do you explain this to other people, and how do you experience it yourself when in fact you used to be able to do things that everybody out there that's playing now they could never do before, and you have those kinds of restrictions on yourself.
Yeah, and he's really young. I'm 26, so we're like the same age. So it's, I'm looking at him like, wow, okay.
Well, and
Yeah.
everybody else is, and he knows that people are looking at him that way. So hopefully, though, like as an example, um, where he is now with that knee, because we want to make sure it doesn't get arthritis in it, and so he's going to have to do where everybody else is maybe going to the gym, or maybe everybody else is sitting on a couch, watching games. He's going to have to make sure that he has an extensive rehab, that he continues to do his stretching and strengthening his knees to make sure that knee doesn't at some point debilitate him even further.
In your book, you mentioned that these players are well compensated to play a collision sport that plays them at a high risk of injury. And just like we discussed about the ages from 27 to 28, when the NFL athletes exit the game severely injured, they are cut off from their source of income. And I did watch one of your video lectures, I think when you were at Marquette University, and you talked about the annuity program and how pretty much it's not really benefiting any of the players because I think one, they have to pay around, is it $6,500? And it only
Right.
lasts up to like 48 months. And so I guess my question is like for, college athletes that are coming into the NFL, should they plan ahead when it comes to getting their own health insurance?
Well, you bring up, we hadn't talked about this before, but I think we really need to now, particularly, when I wrote my book, it came out in 2008 and I started doing 2018, and I started doing the research for it as early as 2006, right? And so I was out in the field, and what we have to understand today, the universe of football in particular, because some landmark cases with the Supreme Court and everything else, it's a much different world. There are young men right now, from what I understand, because of name, image, and likeness. There's a young man that's playing at the University of Michigan, and apparently his contract state that he's going to make about $10 million while he's playing football at the University of Michigan. Well, there's a lot of guys, myself included, that even in today's game are never going to make $10 million playing in the NFL, right? So you're looking at people, and even if you made $100,000 in college, 250,000 a year, made $1 million in college, right, over that career, that's a very different situation. And then, in fact, I would argue, Deion Sanders said this, right? Some of the things that they have in place for financial literacy in the NFL, right? They need to put those in place for college, right? Because you could go transition and go to the NFL as a millionaire, Or you could go into college to the pros from college, having made a couple of million and being broke, right? And then you have to pay off your debts from your NFL life if you're not smart and well educated from it. And what I tell, again, I tell people this all the time, especially when you think about lottery winners. People make a lot of money in the lottery and they make it very fast. And we know that many of them wind up going broke very quickly, right? Because there's scam artists out there. There's all kinds of people trying to press you into invest into this or do this, or I want to start a business. Help me do this, and I'll make you a whole lot of money. And many times, people, the athletes might feel, hey, this was my boy. I grew up with them. I'm going to take care of them because they've taken care of me. And you can end up like Antoine Walker, who played in the NBA for 14 seasons, made, I think, $120 million. And he'll tell you, because of his loyalty to his family and his friends, he wound up being broke. Those things don't change over time. What has to change is we have to help protect these young people um, to learn how to make good, strong, solid decisions and to put a wall between them and others who are trying to get their money. So my family member, I have a nephew that played in the NFL, and his parents, they sat down and they said, okay, we're going to put his money together collectively. We're going to make some family decisions to help him because at 22 years old, he didn't have a lot. He didn't have any experience with that, but his family understood what to do. And so they put his money in a trust and they made sure that, there was balances in place that even if he played a year or two, there's a cushion that he can start the rest of his life with, right? So that's the kinds of pressure that young people are facing now that are playing football, particularly on a Division I level and thinking about trying to go to the NFL is, how to do that as well as how do I preserve my moneymaker? And with the NFL, we say our moneymaker is your body and your brain. You don't have those two in place, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself in the game long enough to make money.
And it's interesting that you mentioned about, like these young guys, when it comes to making money. I always watch the NFL draft every year because I always want to see whether or not Green Bay makes a good choice on who they pick.
Okay.
And when I watch it, I always see these young men, you see some of them like in a really nice suit and they'll have like a grill or like these big chains and things like that. And I know in your book, you did mention how like um, that the transition from college to the NFL is pretty much like a sink or swim. And so when I think of that, I think of like finance, when it comes to that $1.1 million contract in their face and things like that, would you advise them to have like a financial advisor, especially, when it comes to players who are not really used to having money?
Yes, that's important, but we also have to understand if you don't know how the money works, and if you don't have strong financial um, literacy before you get in, or you don't have working relationships with financial professionals, the first question you have to ask yourself is when you have a financial windfall like that, if you don't have experience working with financial planners or other people, and no one in your family has experience doing that, then working with someone is a critical step, but how do you know that the person that you're working with is a good financial planner? How do you know that that person is knowledgeable in finances, but also is putting your best interest first? Right? How do you know that you've made a good choice to work with someone? So I'll give you an example of that. In my book, we talk about Kyle Wilson, who was the first round draft choice. He's a family friend. His brother played football at Princeton, and his brother also has an MBA from MIT. Very smart guy. And the family set it up essentially that any agent who wanted to try to basically be hired by Kyle, they had to go through his brother. And Many of the agents didn't even know that his brother had an MBA and was really knowledgeable about finances. So some of them tried to really skirt that and try to go directly to Kyle. And Kyle would tell him, hey, you need to go do this. And so those who didn't listen to, the way that the family worked together, the structure, who was going to be an agent or a financial person, they automatically eliminated themselves. And then the people who did come to his brother and say, hey, here's what we can do for Kyle. Many of them started off by saying, we can get Kyle a Mercedes. We can get Kyle this line of credit. We can do all of these different things for him. This is why they need to hire us and we'll take care of them. And the brother said, we don't need all of those things. And if you do those things for Kyle, who's going to pay for them? Because and at what rate? If you make Kyle pay for a Mercedes that he doesn't need, what's the rate? How much is he paying you for funding that, financing that up front? Right? So oftentimes people dangle these really, shiny objects in front of these guys, and because they're like, hey, listen, I never had this, and now all of a sudden I'm a baller. I can go out and buy a Mercedes, right? But Kyle's family said, listen, you have everything you need. Let's think about how we are going to help you make your money work for you. And then the other thing that's really important with the Wilson family is that they said we grew up as a middle class family. The parents have everything we need. Our house is paid for, and we have everything. When you play in the NFL, that's your money. You don't owe us anything. It was a pleasure for us to help you get to where you are. And this is you get to really enjoy the fruits of your own labor. We don't need or want your money. That's a very different dynamic than many people. And now let's take that. That happened to him at 22. Imagine when he's in college now, sitting there and he's 17 years old, getting ready to go to college at the University of Michigan, and somebody says, here's $10 million. How are you supposed to know? And how's your family supposed to know unless you have that kind of family background, you have the resources, and you know how to, kind of decide together how to help that young man make those right decisions. There's a lot of vultures out there, and a lot of people just laying in wait to try to take that money from you, right? So it's actually accelerating the exposure and the vulnerability that many of these young people have today.
With that being said, I want to move on and talk about mental health. We know that lately, social media is such a huge platform, and that's where, people, especially my age, get their information from. And I know that you are a huge advocate for Black men's mental health. You attend these conferences and you talk about them. So can you elaborate, like, what do you guys talk about?
Well, you're right. I am very fortunate to. I'm one of the founders, co-founders, and I'm the director of the Black Men's Brain Health Conference that we. It's funded by the a grant that excuse me, received from the National Institute on Aging, as well as financial support we received from the Alzheimer's Association, and we partner with the NFL Alumni Association and the Um, uh, Pro Football Retired Players Association as well. And so our mission and our goal is to help all men, not just Black men, but all men when it comes to issues around brain health. We work primarily, we call it the Black men's brain health because Black men have suffered worse health outcomes than any other, demographic. And we're overrepresented in both high school, college, well, particularly college and pros on the elite levels, right? So we have a certain level of vulnerability. And so what we want people to understand, and we say brain health because to us it's mental health, it's addiction of any kind, drug abuse or anything like that, alcohol abuse, use. It's about dealing with anxiety and stress and depression, all encompassing, right? And so what we want to do is we want to be able to understand what our unique risks are. We want to be able to get men involved with being researchers. We want to definitely help these young men who, by the way, have gone to college, and some of them may not even know that there's what other careers are available to them outside of football. So we want to get them exposed that, hey, they could be doctors. They can transition and be like myself, go back to graduate school, go to medical school, get a PhD. They can become nurses. There's lots of professions that are out there where they would be welcomed and they would make a big impact on the community. And the other thing is that we bring in mental health professionals to talk about the importance when you're going through things. Like, how do you recognize, how do I know I'm depressed, right? People say, are you depressed? Well, how do I know I'm depressed, right? What are the signs that are necessary there? What is stress like? What are our options to deal with it? And also, you don't have to sit in silence. So, what we want to do is we want to bring out to the forefront that there are resources out there, that you're never alone. My transition to life after football, I'm sure I was depressed. I didn't know it. I'd done this thing for 16 years, and nobody prepared me for the day that they gave me my ticket, my plane ticket home, and said, okay, this is it. You're never going to put a helmet on in the rest of your life. I put one on starting at 9 years old or something like that, or 10 years old, and I didn't take it off until they forced me to take it off that many years later, right? So that was very difficult, right? So we want to be able to make sure that people recognize that there's all kinds of resources out there, and there's all kinds of opportunities for you to get involved to help yourself and to help others, right? So, we look back at Junior Seau, who, committed suicide, and we know in part he was struggling. He definitely was, post-mortem. We found out that he had CTE, but there were so many signs or calls for help, but no one in his social circle really knew what to look for. I talked to Rodney Pete, who was his quarterback back when they were in college. He said, "Man, I was just talking to him 2 weeks earlier, and there was no signs. We didn't know, right? Well, part of that is we didn't know what to look for, and the other part is we as men, we're great at masking things. We don't want everybody to see what's really going on inside. We got to put the superhero on the outside of that. So this is why it's really important to be able to have a conference." And to have language where men are talking to other men and listening to other men, so that way we don't have to, be vulnerable in the way that we think we need to be, because we've got to be superheroes, and we can learn how to ask for help, and not only ask for it, but we can express ourselves in a way that can get to the roots of the problem.
And it's good that you actually mentioned about CTE and knowing like the signs of like, okay, when are these players depressed and everything. And it's good that you mentioned Junior, because you beat me to it. I was gonna ask you about it. But yeah, so like I know when I was in high school, I really didn't know much about CTE and brain health when it comes to the NFL. I remembered hearing about the first case from Aaron Hernandez and you know what what happened to him. And like now, fast forward, recently, a former defensive end from the Dallas Cowboys, Marshawn Nealand, he died, recently from suicide, and he was really young. He was 24, and now you have so many players across all aspects of sports that are now being more open about their mental health. And even some players, like recently, Jair Alexander, he decided, to walk away from football for a little bit because of his mental health. So I guess my question is, seeing the growth in, these men who play football and that are now realizing like, hey, something's not right with me. I think it's time to walk away. How would you compare that to back when you used to play?
Well, a couple, and I'm glad you asked that question, but one thing I just want to be very careful, let's not associate CTE, right, with players, because this person committed suicide, or people have some other mental health issues, doesn't mean that there's a direct one-to-one correlation or relationship to CTE. We want to make sure that we don't lead with that. There's many reasons why people could be suffering depression and some other things, and mental health. And of course, CTE is something that we have to be concerned with. But CTE really, from all the work that we're doing, I feel very fortunate to be involved with the Diagnose CTE project out of Boston University. I'm one of the scientists that are involved with that. But we know that it really is, it's more less associated with, we've almost ruled out that it's related to concussions, but it's more about repetitive head impact. So we'd be very careful about that. Let's focus on the mental health issues. Um, The difference between today and when I played, first of all, the biggest difference is that really concussions weren't recognized. You almost had to, not be able to get yourself off the field before they declared it as a concussion. They gave you a little smelling salt and said you were okay, sat you out that game, and then be able to put you back into the week next week or something like that. So the field has evolved immensely. There's been more pressure on football on every level to identify and to treat concussions and make sure that athletes have, the proper resources available. And in some states, like the state I grew up in New Jersey, in order to play football, you have to have a neurocognitive examination before the season starts, so that way they can measure your baseline. And then they also, if you have a concussion, they have something to be able to say, okay, are you statistically back healed and back to baseline before they let you play again? That was something that was never done before. I talked to a friend a couple years ago. Her son graduated high school in North Carolina. I think it was about 3 years ago. And then 2 years ago now, he went to New Jersey to play prep school. And she was surprised that New Jersey requires that on our levels of football. You have to have that baseline neurocognitive exam. And she said, but in my home state of North Carolina, that's not required. Right. And so it's a lot of uneven things. Maybe North Carolina has stepped up today and made that a baseline. But what I would tell anyone that if your son or daughter is playing a collision or a contact sport, it makes a lot of sense to every season have a baseline neurocognitive examination. And if they have a concussion at some point, you know where they are in terms of the healing process. Now it's easier said than done because some families can't afford to have that. Some people don't have insurance and those kinds of things. So, those are some of the disparities that exist in society. And of course, those people who have money and resources, they can have the best access to resources to help them when they get injured. But truly, the difference today, fortunately, is that the awareness is much greater. It gives the athletes and their families more agency on how they want to approach it. And, some people might say, hey, listen, because of what I've been through, it's not worth my risk. I'm going to walk away from the game. And that's a good, smart decision for each person. But what I wouldn't want people to do is to make irrational decisions based on fear. Get as much information about your personal situation. What are your values, and then make sure that you're working with really strong, very good healthcare professionals to make decisions that are best for you. Not in the team's interest, not in the coach's best interest, not in the parents' best interest sometimes, but what's in the best interest of the individual who's going to live with whatever conditions they might have throughout their life.
You did mention, to separate mental health from CTE. Um, as my next question is, when it comes to CTE, because we know that it is a, head-to-head contact. Um, I guess, you say you do research on it. What is like the process of like knowing, I guess, like at that time that a player might have CTE?
Well, so there's really no way to know that, and that's part of the problem. So, just like unlike dementia, like in Alzheimer's right now, there we have a blood-based test to be able to look at certain biomarkers to see if someone can be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. No such We haven't identified those biomarkers in CTE. And that's really what the project is at Boston University. Dr. Michael Lasco and Jesse Mez, they're doing an amazing job leading this. And there's, I think, 4 or 5 sites across the country where we are recruiting individuals. And if anyone who is 50 or over and has played college football, please contact me, and you'll be able to share my information. But it's Robert.Turner, the number 2 at duke.edu, because we particularly need more black men in the study. But that's what we're trying to do, is trying to identify, because right now with CTE, you cannot diagnose CTE until post-mortem. You have to actually, slice the brain over. And so that's the other thing, is we're asking lots of people who have played to donate their brain at end of life in the brain bank, so that way we can collect the data to understand. Now there are some what, there's what we call right now is a syndrome, right? So mood swings, mood behaviors, those kinds of things, right? Because the other thing that we have to do is recognize that not only there are a host of mental health issues like anxiety, depression, stress, those kinds of things, but then there's also many other kinds of neurological disorders, right? So a person could have frontal temporal, dementia. They could have different types of cognitive impairment. So to be able to understand and diagnose all of those things out is really important. So what we say to most people, and really the thing that we need to be able to do, that if you've played, um, and the statistics show that what we've seen, and I don't want to go into all this, but the numbers of people, even people who have played vastly, and then you look at those and the exposure that they've had, it's still the percentages of what we believe today is between 10 and 20% of all people who have played on a high level of football in the professionals, so to speak, in particular, only 10 to 20% will be or have will be at risk of having CTE. That still means 90 to 80% of people who won't, right? So we need to find out at this point, right? And again, things are evolving rapidly. That number may go up really high, it may go down low, but we have to do the blood-based biomarkers and all these other things. But what we're looking for is symptomology, or people showing very big mood swings, right? Different things that would put them in a category that they potentially might have the syndrome until we're able to diagnose whether they actually have CTE or not in the future when we have biomarkers. But the most important thing, and I think is really important in the work that we do, is particularly the loved ones that are in the lives of the people like Junior Seau or any other football player right now. If you are noticing some erratic behavior, some mood swings, those types of things, reach out to me or reach out to Diagnose CTE at a Boston University, or make sure that they go to a doctor, right? Because those are the things that we need to be able to, the caregivers are going to recognize those, or the people, the loved ones in their life, going to recognize those things much earlier than anybody else, and we can try to get them treated, appropriately, a treatment plan for people like that much earlier. Now we get a lot of high school kids come and say, "Hey, I played football and I'm worried about that. I got CTE. I can't remember all of those things." In many of those instances, we definitely would take that very seriously, but we you probably don't have a large enough dose response to have been hit in the head repetitively so much so that it would put them at this other type of risk. But we need to know what's going on there. So what I tell people all the time in the work that I do, and anything around the head, early diagnosis is the key to everything. You think you might have a problem, make sure that you talk to your primary care physician, and then make sure that you get an appointment. If you think it's injury related to your brain, see a neurologist, right? And go from there. But take it seriously. Don't panic. But make sure like anything else, know your status and make sure that you get plan a treatment early through testing and diagnosis.
You mentioned, you have a lot of high schoolers come to you and say, "Hey, I think I might, show a little bit of signs of CTE." So when we talk about the early signs of symptoms, would you say it's just having trouble remembering things and mood swings?
Well, what we say for CTE, one of the things that we've known is called neurobehavioral dysregulation, right? So it's really mood swings, like their moods are up and down. They're all over the place. They're 1 minute they're violent and they're angry, right? It's just a mood dysregulation. When you start to see those things, very erratic behaviors, those are the things that we have seen consistently being. When we talk about the syndrome of people who have had CTE, those are the things that we see, right? You could also see some depression, but memory loss is less of that when around the CTE. But we certainly see the mild cognitive impairment and those kinds of things, and so those are very important. But especially in high schoolers, what I'm looking for more than anything else is there in addition to, like, because there's a lot of reasons that, for instance, a young person could have lots of mood disorders. We want to know, are you taking drugs? What are your, I'm not saying that a lot of people, drunk, young people are, but like, what kind of medications, what kind of drugs, what kind of recreational drugs are you doing? What is your sleep behavior? You could really have a large problem with memory because you're not sleeping enough, right? There's a lot of different things that we need to rule out or address to understand what could be the underlying causes of these things, right? So when people are just like, I can't remember anything, we really want to know what your behaviors are like. Are you drinking a lot of alcohol, a lot, drug dependency, or any of these other things? Are you dealing with anxiety? Have you been properly diagnosed? Do you have anxiety and high levels of stress and you're on some kind of medications and you do take those or you don't? There's all of these kinds of things. So the first thing that I would say is no matter what, make sure that you are, getting an examination. Go see your primary care physician. And then also let them know what your issues are, right? Lots of times in my research, I've had people say, Hey, I've been dealing with these. And we ask them, Did you ever talk to the physician? And they say, No. And I said, Well, why not? And they said, Because the physician never asked. Well, those are key indicators that physicians need to know. And if your physician is not asking and you try to tell them and that physician doesn't pay attention, go find a physician who will, right? That's the kind of thing. Or if you really have an issue, go find a social worker or go find, a mental health professional and tell them these are the things that I'm experiencing. I need help. Thus, the key to everything is to make sure that you are not trying to self-medicate or do any other of these things. Or if someone in your life is recognizing those things, help that person go see, get some kind of professional help going down the right path to deal with it.
That is all the questions that I have. Thank you so much, Turner, for everything and just clarifying and, just breaking down of, mental health and, just everything all around. And once again, like I mentioned before, to anybody, I highly recommend the book that he has written called Not for Long, The Life and Career of an NFL Athlete. Once again, this is not to deter you away from your NFL dreams, but it's just, for me, it was a wake-up call, especially as a reporter myself, this really opened my eyes to, just know like, hey, football these football players from high school to college, and especially in the NFL, just do not have it easy. Just just like everything you explained, they don't have it easy. And as fans, especially football fans, you have to take into consideration that these are human. You know, and actually, I do have one last question. So lately there has been a lot of talk about sports betting, and I know we talked about, mental health when players do feel depressed and things like that. And there has been many incidents where players have expressed how football fans, when they participate in sports betting and they bet on a specific player and they lose money and they go and they harass these players because they lost money. What is your overall opinion about sports betting?
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of sports betting at all. But again, I'm not a fan of gambling, right? I don't want to lose money. I work very hard, and I don't want to get in a value proposition that's designed to separate me from my money so that other people can make money. So I'm not a fan of gambling altogether, first of all. But then also, I think that sports betting, I think, as far as the football player is concerned, let me just take my bias against betting out of it altogether. The thing that you just said that I think is really important, and one day I'll give it as a story, as an illustration. I was having brunch here in Washington D.C. where I live, and the game was on in the restaurant bar setting, and a guy that I was sitting next to was really upset that a player wasn't playing. He was on the injured reserve because of his fantasy football team. And he says, you know what, it's going to cost me for this guy. He's not playing. And I said, well, the guy's hurt. He said, that's not my problem. He goes, this is a professional football player. He gets paid to play. And I said, what? You wouldn't go to work hurt where it could jeopardize your career. He goes, but this is their job. He goes, I want them to play. And I said, even at the expense of his long-term health, he says, that's not my problem. So, that goes back to the point that you said, these are human beings, right? And for me, I don't want to, I don't, that's one of the things I don't like about fantasy football. That's one of the things I don't like about gambling is you reduce the person down to, I hate to say it, but they're nothing more than a performance. They're nothing more than chattel, right? I pay you to do this on the field. I want you to do it, right? I don't want to live in a world where sports reduces the NFL or the individual down to nothing more than a means for me to be able to make money. Now, I recognize the NFL is a business, and that's what businesses are, but that's also why you have the NFL Players Association or a union to protect the interests and the rights of the players, right? And it just really is disheartening to me that at fans, all we want to do is we want to win. We want our spread line to work. I remember a couple of years ago when the University of Michigan, the quarterback threw a pass to the tight end in the end of the end zone, and they would have won the game or would have done something to spread. And it was a young man, and he dropped the ball. He's a kid. He dropped the ball. This is sports. Professionals drop balls at some point. But as a high school kid, I mean, a college kid, he's receiving death threats. Sports is not about that. Sports should never be about that. How did we get here like that? But that's what we're working with. And so that part to me really bothers me. And I wish that we could, and that's to me is one of the really the dangerous areas of betting and sports and all of this other thing is where people don't really care. All they care about is what does this do for me? Right? But at the end of the day, it is a business. It's a major business, but these are human beings that have children that they have to go home to and they got families and all these other things. Right? So that's really where my line is about gambling, betting, and that kind of thing. I want to drive everybody to participate in the conference. Our conference, you can go to mensbrainhealth.org, right? And then our conference is every year during the Super Bowl. This year we'll be in Oakland. Super Bowl is in San Francisco. We'll be in Oakland from February 3rd and 4th. It's a hybrid conference, so you can register and sign up online, or we'd love to have you come and see us in person at Merritt College. But especially those athletes, but their family members or anyone who cares about men's brain health on any level, please come out to the conference. Please be involved with it. And I hope that we can provide you even more information based on what you've asked for. Plus, every conference that we've hosted, we're moving into our fifth year now, but all of the conferences, the materials are archived, the videos are archived online, mensbrainhealth.org. Okay, so I
Okay.
hope to see you all there.